On the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. The results show when the athletes hit the field. With us right now from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the Big Mac blog on DFWOT. It's Mac Engel. How you doing, Mac?
Good, Bryan. How are you this afternoon?
Doing well. Thank you very much for coming on. We've got so much to talk about since we last talked a week ago. First, I want to get your take on Monty Kiffin. He's going to save the day for the Cowboys at defense, right?
It's a little perplexing. It's not like the guy doesn't have a track record or a resume, but for a team that thinks its window is right now, you've basically hired a defensive coach and a scheme that's going to take about at least 2 years to fit, because the pieces that you've been drafting to since 2004 have all been catered to a 3-4. Now this guy comes in with a 4-3, which means you've got to find those guys who are going to fit that. And as we saw with the Cowboys in 2003, 2004, when they had Mike Zimmer as their defensive coordinator, and Bill Parcells insisted that they switch to the 3-4, it takes a while to find those guys. Now, DeMarcus Ware, he played defensive end in college, but he hasn't been in college since 2003 or 4. Anthony Spencer was a defensive end in college, but he's been an outside linebacker since 2007. So, it's going to be hard, but I think it comes down to ultimately is, do you have players? We saw it under Rob Bryan. We've seen it for several years. The Cowboys just don't have enough players, and the guys that they do have get hurt. I would expect to see Bruce Carter make a lot of plays in this defense if he can stay on the field.
Yeah,
the guy's been hurt 2 out of the last 3 years he's played in football, whether it was in North Carolina or now with the Cowboys. Sean Lee can't stay healthy. If he stays healthy, he's a great player. And this does not address the fact they don't really have interior defensive tackles of quality. Maybe Tyrone Crawford can be. And they don't have any players at the safety position. Maybe Barry Church can play. We really don't know yet. But Gerald Sensabaugh is just a guy. He's a pro, but he's not making plays. So Monty Kiffin needs players to look smart. And right now, I don't think the Cowboys have enough players to do that. They didn't have enough guys to do that with a 3-4. Now you got to go out and find new guys for a 4-3. So the hire may be good, but it's going to take a couple of years for it to work.
And the thing that drives me crazy about it is as far as I'm concerned, their top priority has got to be about 3 offensive linemen in this draft. And now you've not only you've got to upgrade your talent on defense, but now you've created more holes.
Yeah, pretty much. And you look at that offensive line, you say you got 3 holes there. You might be going with 4.
Yeah.
I mean, you pretty much say Tyron Smith is your guy, and his upside's so big that you're going to be committed to him. But Doug Free is a huge. I mean, Jermaine Purnell was basically splitting time or starting ahead of him by the end of the year. The interior of the line, Nate Livings and those guys were erratic at best. So you've got all these different holes, and you can't address them all at the same time. But the fact is, the Cowboys' offensive line has been such a weakness for this franchise since the 90s.
Yeah.
Until the Cowboys, and you could say the other side of the line, the other side of the ball as well, until the Cowboys properly and adequately address their line issues, this is going to continue forever.
I agree with you. So we're going to move on now.
Okay. Well, we're good. That's a good week. All right,
because I'm just too depressed to talk about it, because it seems, again, it's, Jerry selling snake oil and no hope. So, I mean, I did see you did get a chance to crush on Wade Phillips a little bit in the Big Mac blog, and I'm always a fan of that. So what was your take on Wade Phillips and how he caused the Houston demise yesterday?
It is amazing to me. The guy's been a defensive coordinator or a head coach since 1981, which means obviously he got his foot in the door to football because of his dad.
Sure.
But you don't stay in the NFL that long in those positions because of your dad. You're there because you're good at your job. It is amazing to me. The guy has been around as much winning as he's been around, between the Broncos, the Bills, the Cowboys, the Texans. I mean, on and on and on. Wade Phillips has been around winning, and his teams always suck in the playoffs.
It's consistent.
It's amazing. It's incredible. Look at the Texans the last 2 years. He comes to the Texans, they start having winning seasons. They get to the playoffs, they stink unless they play the Bengals.
And tell me if you've heard this before. The Texans finished out the year losing 4 out of their last 6.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is time and time and time again. You cannot say that Wade Phillips has not made a great impact on that franchise since he arrived. J.J. Watt's a monster. All these different guys are making plays and getting paid under his scheme. And that always happens. And when it comes right down to it, when it comes to January, his team loses. Without fail. He is as good of a defensive coordinator as he is, and as good of a guy as he is. He's a really nice man.
Yeah, he is.
It is mind-boggling. Unfortunately, he is the Marty Schottenheimer of defensive coordinators.
Oh, man.
And it is. It's unfair. You're like, holy cow, the guy's got records. You want it. And then when it comes right down to January, there he is up in New England yesterday getting his fanny kicked again.
And the good news is he's Houston's problem now. So, all right.
Yeah, but I mean, and I know you're in Tyler, and I don't know if I guess Tyler would claim Dallas-Fort Worth a lot more than Houston. But it is amazing to me that city, with the exception of the Rockets, just can't buy a break.
It's been pretty ugly in Houston. We call it the mosquito capital of the world, but it has been pretty awful for quite a while now.
And you really thought when the 1st of December, when they were 11-1, you thought, wow, they're going to get home field. You know, they kicked the living taillights of the Broncos, and you're like, they're going to get home field, and they're going to go to the Super Bowl. And here we are. Divisional rounds, and they're going home. Because the reality of it is, as good as that team is, and they were really good, that wasn't an accident. They weren't tough enough, and they got their rear ends kicked by a better Patriots team.
Well, when you get down to it, you got a 94-yard kickoff return to start the game, and you come away with 3 points. You knew what kind of day it was going to be when that was over.
Pretty much. I think you're exactly right. I think once that play happened, you just kind of sense if there's your opportunity to take the game, and you walk away with 3 when you should have. You had 7 handed to you, and you walk away with 3, and that was it.
Okay, so now we move on to the college ranks, and Gary Patterson has decided that Casey Pahal will come back to TCU and play quarterback. Good decision, bad decision? What do you think?
I like it. I don't think I think this is an impossible situation. I really do. I think they mishandled it in August. I was pretty out there with my opinion, which didn't earn me a lot of friends. that I thought they should have suspended Casey, but they didn't. They elected to, stick by the student handbook, which is to basically smack him on the fanny and say, "Do right," and it didn't work. And then he disenrolled from school. At that point, Bryan, there's a lot of political pressure over at TCU to just kick Casey out of school. But I do believe that Gary Patterson and the administrators, especially the athletic director, Chris O'Connell, who really does believe in trying to help a guy out and give second chances across the board, not just in football, but across the board, that they were like, no, we're going to see if we can make this right. And from all accounts, he went away to Austin to a treatment facility and was in an inpatient facility for quite a while. Then he was living with his sister and doing an outpatient treatment up until I think Friday when he came back, and then he was scheduled to meet with administrators and the football team yesterday and go back to class today. I think anybody who watched TCU knows that the only thing that separated them from 7-6 and 10-3 or 9-4 was Casey Paha.
No question.
Trayvon Boykin did a nice job, and he did everything he could have possibly done, but he's not as accurate as Casey Paha. And if you're not accurate, you're not going to win games, and that's the difference. So I think they did the right thing. Ultimately, I think the way they handled it initially was to try to just sort of do as little as possible. Then they went all in and tried to do everything. So I think everybody from his mom, his dad, to the head coach, to the administrators, I think they're trying to do right by him. Whether it ultimately work, I don't know. Everybody who's been around him, who I've talked to, said he looks great. It's a totally different kid, and for his sake, you hope it works. But even when Gary and I talked yesterday, he was very candid. He said everybody's going to be watching on this, and until they positively, absolutely have to, they are not going to make him public. I would imagine until spring ball. So they're going to do everything they can to shield him. But at some point, you have to let it go and let him go be an adult. see if he can do it on his own. But I think for the time being, they're going to manage the situation as best they can and see how it goes. If he plays, he's a senior. If he plays in the fall and he starts all 9, 10, 12 games, I don't think there's any reason why TCU can't finish in the top 3 in the Big 12 next year.
Oh, no question. I would think they'd be favored against LSU to start the year.
You do not. Do you really?
Well, because LSU's lost, 11 players now early to the NFL draft. They're going to have to rebuild their defense. You catch them game one, I mean, it sure sets up that way with a good senior quarterback. Now, if Boykin was playing, I think LSU'd be favored by 2 touchdowns.
I think the wild card in this is that when I watch TCU, is they had a Big 12 caliber defense.
Mm-hmm.
They do not have a Big 12 caliber offensive line.
Well,
and that's going to be a huge issue unless those tackles get better. Those tackles got destroyed by Michigan State. Unless those tackles get better, I think LSU is going to eat Casey Paul alive. Because you and I both know that they will go. They'll find guys just because they got 11. They'll beat guys coming in. But I do agree wholeheartedly with one thing, and that is if you're going to catch them, you're catching them in the right time.
Absolutely, because it's going to be a really young team, and I think LSU's got some serious offensive problems they got to fix, and it may have to do with coaching. I don't know. Now I'm going to ask the most cynical question of the day. How much money do you think Oprah Winfrey paid Lance Armstrong for this interview that he's going to do on Thursday?
That's a really, that was funny you should say that. That kind of crossed my mind.
I'm not cynical or anything,
No. That did cross my mind initially but I thought, it's not like Oprah Winfrey needs this. It's not like Oprah Winfrey needs the money.
Her network needs this.
Yeah, so that's. I was just going to say that. This network is struggling, so maybe they gave him something. And you and I both know that a lot of these guys at the very top of the food chain aren't going to cross the street for anything less than, $1,000 or whatever else. So
yeah, I mean these kinds of confessional interviews bug me to death. Because instead of standing up before a room full of reporters and getting drilled, he's picked his own interviewer, and he's basically, I realize he says he's going to answer whatever question she asks, but I'm guessing there's been some kind of arrangement made. So, it just kind of smells.
It does. And I think that's just sort of the age that we live in, where you get somebody who stepped in it the way he did, or the worst was Pete Rose.
Yes.
Pete Rose profited or tried to profit from his apology with his, but the guy, by all accounts, Pete Rose will literally not cross the street unless you give him $1,000. He wants money at every turn, and I don't know if Armstrong did this, but I think you're right. I just think in Armstrong's case, I don't think it matters what he says. I mean, he needs to be contrite and apologize and said, listen, I did all this stuff on the back of a syringe just like everybody else. I just don't, I think in this day and age, people want to be mad, so they're going to be mad at him. And it doesn't, but he needs to do it, and I kind of agree with you. I don't think I think of all of them, the very best one I've ever seen was Andy Pettit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, jumped right out. The minute it came out, though, Andy Pettit stepped up. I mean, it was not months and years of lying and putting it off, I mean, he handled it immediately. With Armstrong,
he didn't run from it.
No.
He didn't hide from it. He's like, nope, this is... I remember A-Rod's. A-Rod's was pretty good. I thought he handled that pretty candidly. But, I mean, granted, this is not apples to apples. This is a guy who... won multiple titles and was under this cloud for more than a decade, like Pete Rose, and held off for more than a decade. And now, in the face of 1,000 eyewitnesses, 8 trillion pieces of documentation that says he was taking the most sophisticated steroid doping that's ever existed. Now he's like, yeah, okay, I did it. And it doesn't, does it matter? Yeah, obviously it taints his legacy forever. But in terms of the interview, it will completely depend on how Oprah Winfrey handles the questions and whether or not she really asks the questions that need to be asked. Then you'll have an idea of how open he is about it. If she tiptoes around it, and then you'll know that there were agreements made. If Oprah Winfrey, who needs nothing, has to make agreements, then what the hell are we even doing? She could ask him. She's got enough power and enough clout to be able to ask anybody anything.
And she could float him alone.
No kidding. She could buy him
10 times over. She could buy him a new bike.
I just don't. I just think in this particular case, the best thing that he could probably do is, say everything that needs to be said, and then just go away for a while.
Now, what he has said, according to the Associated Press, was that he was just going to, he didn't say it, but they report that he's going to just say, yeah, I did it, but he's not going to get into a lot of long details about how he beat the system and all this kind of stuff. And to be honest with you, I'm wondering, Mac, I mean, they've always had this documentation and they've always had these accusations, and he's always denied them. I mean, why now? I mean, what have they got now that's any more damning than what they had 10 years ago?
That's a good question. I mean, I think some of it has to do with, obviously, the USADA report was a huge game changer. He's not competing anymore.
He wants to run competitively.
Yeah, I know he wants to do the triathlon thing, which is like, okay, go ahead, do it.
But they won't let him if they'll ban him if he doesn't come clean, I think is the way it works.
That is. From what I've read, if he cooperates, then they'll work with him and possibly let him compete again. I would like to know who he conferred with that gave him this idea of, you know what, why don't you just do this? Because somebody someplace has told him, outside of the USADA and any kind of United States Triathlon Association or anything like that, has told him this would probably be the best thing for you long term. But it's just like any of these guys, it's just going to take a long time. And for Lance, when you're a cyclist and your legacy was these 7 tour titles clean in an era when everybody was doping. Oh, and you beat cancer.
Yeah.
The truth was he was different than everybody else in that he beat cancer, but as a cyclist, he really wasn't different than anybody else because he had to roid just like everybody else. And to be honest, Bryan, for me, I always thought he was doing it just because the whole sport was dirty.
Yeah.
Anybody who was winning had to do it. And I just thought, man, whoever his doctor is a genius.
Well, that's the thing. If you've known anybody that's ever had any kind of cancer, okay, and you've seen them have to go through the treatments and all that they go through, that's as close to death as you come, to be healed. And how this guy is still able to perform at the highest level of his sport after going through those things, you think, okay, it just doesn't add up. It's impossible. No human being, Clark Kent might pull this off, but I don't know that Lance Armstrong came from Krypton. I'm just saying,
No, and I think that was just it. I think you took a guy who genetically, from a young age, looked like he was at the top of the food chain for endurance sports. So you take that premise, and then you put him with some really good doctors and scientists, and then you've got a 7-time Tour de France champion, and that's what it was. I mean, the saddest part is that there are millions of people out there who should believe and be inspired by the fact that this was a guy who beat cancer to compete competitively in cycling. That's amazing. He didn't have to win. He didn't have to win to inspire millions. The fact that he did win, the fact that he was a champion, spawned even more admirers, inspired even more people. And now those people, who should be no less inspired by the fact that he defeated cancer, now look at it and say, oh well, I guess he was no different than Barry Bonds or any of these other guys. And unfortunately, the way that the carrot is so lucrative these days in professional sports, It is really, really hard not to sit there and say, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot. And when you see the results that you do, I can't imagine that many of these guys who do it and see positive results say, yeah, let's do this again.
Crazy. Just crazy. All right. Of the NFL teams in the playoffs, to go back to that without talking about Wade Phillips, of the teams in the playoffs, who were you most impressed with? Which game caught your attention the most? I mean, I know you were playing with a 3-year-old all weekend. Did you even get a chance to watch the games this weekend?
Not easy. The Denver-Baltimore game is one of the best games I've seen in a long time. That was as entertaining. That was entertaining. That's why people watch the NFL. Same with the Falcons game. Although the Denver-Baltimore game was exciting from beginning to end. The Falcons game was really picked up in the second half. The team I was most impressed with was, it's really not hard to be impressed with Baltimore right now. Joe Flacco really seems to have figured this thing out. I don't know. It's a really good. They're all impressive in their own ways, and in any one of the 4 teams that are left, I think you can make a case to say they should win the Super Bowl, or they are going to win the Super Bowl. But given their track record and given their history, it's hard not to put your money on New England. Although I did say, I have to go back and check this. I think for the first time ever, there is a chance that I might have the 2 Super Bowl teams right.
Who you got?
I did. I think I picked Atlanta against Baltimore.
Oh,
I think I did.
okay.
Right. I've been picking both of those teams for like the last 3 or 4 years. So this is law of averages, right? Eventually,
just stick with them, buddy.
Right. Eventually, yeah. Right. Eventually, the sun will come up in the west. So I think right. Ask me today. I'm liking Baltimore a lot. I just think they got a thing going. Even though I'm not crazy about that run defense, I really like Baltimore a lot. But ask me tomorrow, and I'll probably like, I don't know, the Cardinals.
Jeez, the Cardinals.
Right.
Okay, hey, and by the way, who are the Eagles going to end up with as a head football coach? I mean, they've interviewed everybody on the planet.
We're going to look at him.
Huh?
Who's the head coach at White House? They're looking at him.
He's available.
Right. It is crazy to me how many guys have turned down that job. It's not like it's a bad job.
Who was it I saw they were interviewing today? I mean, it's somebody that I was going, what? You know, I went blank. The
one to me that's mind. And I understood they were trying to do something bold when you went out and looked at Chip Kelly or even Brian Kelly. But the one to me that I'm a little surprised that is not, he just must tank in interviews, is Cincinnati Bengals defensive coordinator Mike Zimmer.
I guess.
He was Cowboys for a long time. That is a really, really good coach, and he must just bomb in interviews.
This is how bad it's gotten. The Eagles are interviewing Brian Billick.
Oh, that's right. It was Billick.
That's why I was trying to remember. It was Brian Billick, and I'm going, Brian Billick hasn't coached in forever, and the only time he did anything, he got real lucky and got a great defense. He was supposed to be an offensive genius.
Yeah, I remember that.
Remember that? Remember the Cowboys were looking at him? They were going to bring him in.
Yep. I don't know. I mean, I think what happened with the Eagles was I really think they thought Chip Kelly was going to be their guy, and when Chip Kelly, by all reports, hesitated, then they knew that they didn't have him. And then the Brian Kelly thing, it looks like that was more of a leverage play on the part of Kelly, Brian Kelly. And now they're like, okay, well, who are we going to look at now? There's a lot of good guys out there. Ray Horton, defensive coordinator of the Cardinals. Mike Zimmer's there are a lot of guys out there, but it all comes down to this. Can you develop Nick Foles? Because they're not going with Mike Vick. So now it's, can you develop Nick Foles? And right now, I wouldn't be surprised if they went with Brian Billick, because here we are in January 14th or 15th.
Wow.
And they don't have a head coach. So don't be surprised if Brian Billick is the head coach of the Eagles next season.
Brian Billick. Man, that came out of nowhere.
No doubt.
Cowboys ought to be real happy about that one then.
No kidding.
Oh, man. Hey, Mac, it's great talking to you, buddy, and can't wait to see whether your Atlanta Falcons and the Ravens are hold up by next Monday when we talk again.
I'm hoping.
We all need a win once in a while, don't we?
No kidding. Yeah, make me feel better.
All right, buddy. Hey, thanks very much for coming on. We appreciate it.
All right, anytime, Brian. Have a great week.
You too, buddy. Mac Engel from the Fort Worth Star Telegram, DFWOT on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.